Welcome everybody back to the Content Matters podcast. I am very happy to have Pablo Gonzalez here today. He is the co-founder and co-host of the Categories Thinkers community and podcast. That's a free community that brings together people interested in wanting to learn and know more about category design. Major discussion of what we're going to have today, but he's also the CEO and co-founder of Be the Stage, which is a consultancy that helps companies drive business through community creation. And you're the host, I guess, of another podcast too called the B2B Community Builder Show. And it's like, wow, Pablo, do you ever not do anything? That's a huge amount of stuff to do.
I'm a big believer in content. I'm actually also the host of the Not Your Average Investor show, which is my biggest client. And I also host their show as well. And it's all about rental property investing. But yeah, I'm a big believer in content. I believe that content really matters, Barb.
That is great. Perfect, because that's perfect for the Content Matters podcast, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my first question. I was kind of going through your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that it's like 2 years ago that you did a post on category design on LinkedIn. And it sounded like it was the first time you'd ever really talked about it. Maybe not, but to me, that's what it sounded like, encouraging people to get into it, to learn about it. And then I was in the comments, and Christopher Lochhead was in there, who, as everybody says, is the godfather, the father of category design. And he's telling you to connect with John, and I'm going to say his name wrong, Ruggi.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me like that was the time for you. Like that's when things really clicked. And I was just wondering, is that true? And what did you think about connecting with him there?
Yeah. First of all, it was awesome. It was one of these moments where I'm like, thank you, internet, for existing, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, I read Play Bigger in like January of 2020 as I was just starting to monetize and my business was just starting to build, and I had a small book of clients. And I immediately, as soon as I read it, I was just like, this is genius. I'm all in, right? And I started implementing it into my content strategies. I held a small event, actually March 14th, 2020 in the mountains of North Carolina, to host like a workshop for a couple of people for category design. But then from there until when I made that post, I wasn't really able to find other category designers, right? Like the book is 4 authors. It doesn't start with Christopher Lochhead, and yet Christopher is the guy that's the most visible, the most reachable, because he's really active and making content. So it took me about 2 years to just find anybody else in the ecosystem that I could really, really connect with. And that's when I made that post, right? I had my first, you know this because you're in the category thinkers community, but I had my first categories in the wild moment. I saw that hard seltzer was this thing that was a new category and there was going to be this battle for it. And I finally had a take on it. So I just recorded myself as the sun was rising on the beach, and I thought I had like really good lighting, and I just made this kind of like take on it, tagged Lochhead on it, and he immediately really impressed me by his generosity, right? Like I think this is kind of fast forward to the end, but I started DMing with him shortly thereafter. And he basically told me this thing. He's like, listen, man, for the majority of my life, I thought I had this key to the door that people wanted to open, and yet nobody really wanted to take it. It had a very low rate of convincing people about this stuff and the power of it. Then Play Bigger came out, and slowly but surely it started really convincing people. And I thought that I was going to be this drunk at a bar murmuring to myself about how I could have helped all these people. And yet now here I am. I have one of the top rated podcasts on Apple. I have one of the top newsletters in all of Substack. This Play Bigger is one of the top 1% business books of all time. And I'm a really firm believer of when you get to the top of the effing mountain, as he talks, you throw down an effing rope.
Yeah.
Right. So, that was really just a big opening moment. And I think he does introduce everybody to John Ruggi, because John, I think, is one of the guys that took category design, started his own blog on it, and started doing it. That wasn't one of the 4 core Play Bigger guys. And yeah, that was my first moment of connecting with other people in a community, this sense of community around category design that I had been looking for since January of 2020. And now 2 years after that, we have a real community, which is really cool. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll definitely will talk about
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
yes, and not to kind of go all gaga on Christopher Lockhead, but his LinkedIn, his personal LinkedIn
Mhm.
newsletter is
Yeah.
like my highlight of whatever day it happens to come out because he's freaking hilarious and super smart at the same time. So best newsletter I've ever read.
Yeah. The guy's brilliant, funny, and really emotionally authentic, which I
Yes.
think is really, really cool.
Yeah, you do not see that. It's very rare. That's
Yeah.
something I would strive to be.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it then. How do you define category design?
I define category design as seeking to radically differentiate yourself, right? So it is the idea of creating a space inside somebody's brain instead of competing for space inside someone's brain that already existed. That's my most simple definition. Other ways that I've put it is I believe that category design, the mental scaffolding around category design, as somebody who has just, you were telling me earlier, right? You have a marketing degree, you've studied this stuff. I have never studied marketing, I've none of that, but I've parachuted into this world because I've always been obsessed with behavior and influence. And when I read Play Bigger and the framework around category design, what I took it as is this is like Robert Cialdini's book of influence that talks about principles that influence one to one. Category design is influence at an industrial scale. It's how you can use behavioral economics, the levers of influence, and psychology in a way to affect decision making on from an organizational level is probably the best way that I can put it.
Does and I guess one of the things that I mean, that's all great. Does that mean that it's this big huge thing, this big huge project, this big huge initiative, or can it be something not that kind of super great? Because that's what everybody thinks, right? Oh my God, I got to build a category. That's going to take forever. What's the point of
Yeah.
that? You
Again,
know?
another thing that we talked about, right? I also don't have the baggage of coming in from the B2B SaaS world when I learned about category design, right? So I didn't I didn't equate category design to Gartner category or Forrester category or whatever other gatekeeper that bequeaths categories upon people. So for me, category
Yeah.
design, I was reading it and I was fascinated by Play Bigger as I read it. And it was really the last chapter. The last chapter of Play Bigger. I don't know if you remember it, but it's all about like your career, like a personal category design kind of like manifesto. And it really read like my own career. And it really spoke to me in the sense of in the last places I've been employed, I always came in with a title that didn't exist before I got there. Right. So like I created my own space within a company. So I was never encumbered by the
Right.
idea that category design has to be this thing that needs a $2 million PR budget and a $10 million events budget and all this like ad spend and blah 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 blah. I don't believe I think the results from category design that we are most familiar with are these massive results, right? Because when you do this right, I don't think that there's a more powerful force in the world. But on a micro level, I believe that focusing on the problem, which is the core strategy of category design, is
Hmm.
something that as a person you can execute, as a department you can execute on, and definitely as a business owner is the way that I would do it. For me, it came from my interpersonal relationships and understanding that when I speak to someone, when I'm speaking to you, if I can think about the world from your perspective instead of my own perspective and frame the things that I am trying to accomplish or the things I believe in a way that relates to something that you are trying to solve for, I've always gotten better results. Right. So, like, that is on a
Yeah.
personal level. If you extrapolate that to how you do that as a company, now you are a category designing company. But I think that it can be done at any scale.
Yeah. And so you're kind of talking about it a little bit from a marketing perspective. Is But that's not who owns category design, is it? Or does it kind of sit more with the
Listen, I think if
marketing
you're a
group?
marketer and you think like a category designer, you're going to do better than other marketers. At the end of the day, if you really want to execute, like we said, influence at an industrial scale, then the business owner, the CEO, the top level executive is the one that really wants to care, right? Like that really wants to believe in this thing, or you're going to get stuck in what you and I spoke about before, somebody that just wants to compare themselves to someone else, right? So if you are
Yeah.
really thinking from the standpoint of we are unlike everyone else, then however as high up as you can go, then that's going to influence the rest of the company, right? If you are a I'll give you an example, right? Because this is one of the companies that I really started like looking at and took a lot from as my maturity rate of understanding category design and applying it really started to hit. I was really taken aback by how BombBomb was executing this about 2 years ago. They had a chief evangelist,
Mhm.
they had an in-house head of category design, they had a community person in play, which I think are three key pieces of executing on category design at a big scale. And they had this lightning strike of human-centered communication. They printed this, they wrote this book, fantastic book, and they were trying to elevate what they were doing from a being a video platform, a video messaging platform, to solving for this idea of human-centered communication in a digital age. They did a phenomenal job at identifying a villain, which was digital pollution. That hits everybody, right? Like you hear digital pollution, you're like, yes, it's called my inbox. It's called all the stupid notifications Facebook gives me about somebody I don't really know posting something. I don't care, right? So like, how do you communicate
Yeah.
more efficiently? And they had me at that moment. And what ended up happening is they published it. They had this big lightning strike, which is a category design moment. But then they just went back to being a video messaging platform, right? If they would have taken a true category design approach, then they would have thought less of what can we do with video and more how can we reduce digital pollution. How do we go from being a digital, like a video platform, to being a platform that also helps um, sort through spam emails or cold outreach? How do we become a gatekeeper in cold outreach? How do we facilitate more one-to-one engagements that are authentic? How do we validate people, right? Like they could have become like a validation source of who's real and who isn't, like the blue check mark of email or something like that, if that's what they're really trying to do. But instead they went for like a big marketing play of category design. Worked really well because definitely pinged on my radar and a bunch of other people. They published a Wall Street Journal bestselling book, but then they retreated to selling their product as opposed to really going far at this is the problem that we really, really want to solve. And based on that, the solutions we develop come from that, not from what already exists.
Okay, I see. I've never really thought of it that way. Like I've never kind of gone into that kind of depth and thought about it. But it sounds like when you do traditional marketing, there's a lot of product marketing involved in it, and it's all about the product. And yeah, companies are coming out of their shell and doing more content marketing, but it always seems to come back to the product. Like a lot of people don't kind of go outside of that. But if you're trying to build a category, that's not what you want to do, is what you're saying, right? You need to focus on what people want to use it for and what it's going to help people do and tell
Yeah.
that
What
story.
problem does it solve? And what is a point of view about the problem that is compelling enough for you to decide that you are on the same path as these folks? Right? It's less
Yeah.
convincing and more enrolling into a mission.
Okay. So that's why you say you have to really completely rethink marketing, because you don't do marketing with when you do category design the same way you would do traditional marketing in a company.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it look, the from the outside in, it can look the same, but
Yeah.
if you read a website from a category designer above the fold, and you read a website from somebody else that's in the Me Too game, you're gonna see a problem that they are like highlighting. They're speaking directly to someone, like you were the character, you're the context, and here's your problem. You're gonna see that immediately, and if you are that person, it should grab you, right? Um, One
Yeah.
of the things I like to say is you never really start a conversation with anyone. The best that you can hope for is to join a conversation that's already happening in someone's head. A well articulated point of view is something that when someone's having a conversation and you come in with a point of view that resonates with the way that they see the world and the problems that they're having and the way that they wish to see the world, immediately gets that person into the similar conversations, parallel conversations, and now you're both walking on a path together. And you'll find that in great category designers, they're able to do that in top of fold copy, in writing out content and various different things. You'll see that they enter from the standpoint of, it's not come understand me, it's I understand you, let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. This really great question in the chat that because, and I think this aligns really nicely. What are the habits that you need to have as a category designer? Because I think that it's a mindset, but it's other things you need to kind of do or kind of think
Yeah.
to do
I
that.
so I recently met up with John in Colorado last week, and he blew me away because he told me that he reads the Wall Street Journal every single day and looks for a change in context. In like he'll read as many articles as he can to try to find a change in context that he can apply category design to. So um, I'll rewind a little bit. The category design advisors, John and Damp and Kevin Maney, they put out this great thought piece of the category formula, right? We talk about that a lot on the Category Thinkers podcast. And essentially, a category is
Mhm.
when context plus missing plus innovation, right? So when there's a new context out there, there's a really good chance that there's something missing within this new context that will allow you to innovate in a way that allows you to solve a problem in a completely new way, right? So he's always looking for a new context that will therefore open up a new missing that will therefore allow for a new innovation. Another way you can say that, Christopher Lockhead says all the time, is new categories beget new categories, right? Because whenever something new arises, there's going to be an externalities that creates another new environment for which you can find a new solution for, find a new problem around. For me, my habit as a category designer is I'm always trying to think, instead of from me out, I'm trying to think from the audience in. I'm trying to like
Right.
put myself in the shoes of the person and what they're thinking about and what is the actual thing that they are solving for and what they're struggling with, and communicating that way. So instead of little things that I do, anytime I open up an email or a message, it's really easy to say, Barb, I'm a big fan of the Content Matters podcast. Instead, I'll start with the word you. Barb, you're doing this on the Content Matters podcast, and I thought that was interesting because of this. So there's a reason why I'm reaching out to you, right? Like if you start from the other person's perspective to me, that is a very foundational telltale sign of somebody that is a category thinker.
I like that. I try to do that a lot myself. Kind of look at it from how other people are perceiving the world, and especially what I do. Most of my marketing is with product
Mhm.
companies, SaaS companies, um, and when they tend to talk, it's all about the product, and I try to think, well, why do people need it? Like, what is the challenge they're trying to solve? And I'm going to look at it from that perspective. So is category design a go to market function then, or is because there's like product led,
Yeah.
service led, event led, people led. There's all kinds of led go to markets, but you don't hear people say category led because I don't. Maybe that doesn't fit quite
Yeah.
like that.
I think category design, I don't think category design is a business strategy, right? So when I hear product led growth or, those kinds of go to market functions, they fall underneath category design, right? Like if you're going to make your true north a problem, and your true north is to be completely different than everybody else, then everything else that you do will be affected by that, right? Including the product, product-led growth can still be the way that you acquire clients, right? Like you can still be trying to get them in with a free version that then continues. But the first thing that's going to get them in is the way that you state the problem, right? The way that you either make a new problem, like a non-obvious problem, obvious, or an obvious problem, you make a non-obvious solution obvious to them, right? So like that's the way in. Barb, you're great at content, right? Like I believe that all content, when you are looking at content from the audience standpoint, your brain always starts with, is this interesting to me? And if it's interesting to you, then you engage, and then it goes into, okay, it's interesting, do I actually trust what they're saying, yes or no? And then if I trust what they're saying, then it's, is it actually for me, right? To me, category sits at, is this interesting to me, right? Like if you can phrase it from the beginning, or your approach is, this is a problem that exists and I have that problem. And like they say in Play Bigger, right? She who can state the problem the best will be known to have the best solution. If you can state the problem in a way
Mm.
that I feel like you just took the words right out of my soul and said it the way that I wish I could have articulated it, I'm officially interested. And I officially believe that you understand this problem as well as anybody else.
Right. And so when you're creating content, then, because this was something that I didn't even think about when you mentioned it to me, how you create your content, what kinds of content you create, how you get it out to people, is that all different in category design?
I think about it differently. Right? Like I don't think anybody has really just coined the whole, this is the only way to do it, right? But what I
Yeah.
think about when I think about category creation content, the the queen on the chessboard is the POV, right? So the point of view of how you see this category, the idea of, this is what the world looks like right now. And I agree, I have to agree with, yes, I'm looking around, that's what the world looks like. Here's the problem, right? So like that's when you make the problem obvious to me. Maybe you name a villain at that point. Here are the ramifications of that problem. That is a description of the way that the problem affects me in a day-to-day life. And I have to see myself in the suffering of that problem. Then if you nail those three things, now I'm agreeing with you. I'm like, okay, you see the world the way that I do it. You understand my plight. You understand my problem. Then the mind is open to this idea of like, what's the big idea, right? So it's essentially storytelling fashion, right? Like you are saying context, character, conflict, and then you're ready for this big idea. That's the category. So introduce, like if you're doing this and this and this and this, what you really, and you're suffering from this and that and this and that, then the solution is this. And you're like, okay, so that's the idea. And then you talk about future state of that problem being solved through this category, through this new solution. And those are essentially use cases, right? So to me, that's the anchor behind it all. You need to develop a point of view before you develop a name of a category, before you think of like what the product is, before any of these other things. You have to be able to come up with, the world is like this. This is the problem with it. This is how people are suffering from this problem. If we think about it like this, now we're cooking with something. And if we cook with it, this is what the beautiful recipe turns out with. And once you do that, then if you think about it from a content standpoint, you can start to categorize all the content that you make into, am I making content about the way the world is? Am I making content about the problem? Am I making content about the ramifications of the problem? Am I making content about the category? And am I making content about future state with the category? And if you can keep that mental scaffolding as you are creating the different layers of content that you need for the different parts of the buyer journey, it starts to make much more sense. And you start putting that into the whole, like, is it interesting to me? Do I trust this person? Is this for me? Now you have a pretty clear path of how the person thinks about this thing and how it's affecting them, and the different kind of like levels of decision making and buyer journey that they need to be on, that you can start to serve forward.
I was just mentally creating that kind of chart in my head as you were kind of listing all of that, thinking, oh my God, that would be
Yeah.
so cool to do, because everybody does that buyer journey, awareness, consideration, decision, what comes after that. And it's just doesn't work that way. But when you think about content, you do have to kind of slot it
Mhm.
into those categories, even or those stages, even though people kind of buy like this. They're in and out of those
Totally, and
stages
I'm
all the
really
time.
by the way, this is the first time that I'm speaking publicly about this, even though I've been executing on this
Yep.
for the last 2.5 years, and I'm really happy that that landed for you because it's exactly what you said, right? We're so used to hearing of a linear buyer journey, but we know it's circular, right? So
Yep.
if in your head you know what part of the POV you're making content around, and you can match it to, okay, this person looked like they were interested. I feel like I have a relationship with me. They trust me, but I feel like they're back to not being interested because they don't think it's for them. Now you got to slot it in there. Now you're like, okay, now I got to come up with part of the use case piece, part of the part where it's like you get they got the category. I need to make sense of, like, look at how the category applied in your life would apply to you. And now that can be used to get them interested again. And then now they're back in kind of like a similar decision making framework, but it wasn't really linear, right? Like you kind of came down here and you came back to here, but you still got to get their attention with something that like adds context to their life.
Yeah. And you mentioned the or not a chief evangelist, but an evangelist with Bomb Bomb earlier. Do you think that's a role that's really important to kind of help promote
I
a
love
new
this question,
category?
because I love Ethan Butte's Chief Evangelist podcast. I don't know if you listen to it, but I think he asks
No.
everybody what the role of a chief evangelist is. For me, the role of a chief evangelist is the tip of the spear on the point of view. I believe that any community, any category is built by starting with at least one person. Some companies have many, but it has to start with at least one person that is really passionate about this problem, that is out there interacting with people to understand who has the problem and who doesn't have the problem, and iterating through the content that it takes to see if it echoes with them, right? For me, on a personal level, when I started this company in 2019, I took a 90-day purposeful pause from my last gig to like deciding whether I even wanted to start a company, and I booked 4 conferences
Mhm.
to just go out there and iterate, right? And what I did was I ended up meeting like 150 people, and I still have that spreadsheet, which was really cool. But what that represents was 150 people where I was just like, man, I see the world like this and I think it's going here. And they're like, yeah, but it's really going here. So then the next person, it's like, oh, well, I see the world and it's going here. And they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, well, the problem is this. Nah, I don't know if the problem is that. Right. So like the ability to iterate through, whether it's on a one-to-one conversational networking level, or as a content strategist, making pieces of content, putting them out there, seeing what comes back, and being able to fit it all in and continue to evolve that, I believe is the role of the chief
Yeah.
evangelist. And if you are, like if you are looking to design a category, your true north should be to have the most rock solid point of view possible. That's the most current for the state of the world right now, that resonates the most with the market and the type of person that you want to serve. And that chief evangelist should really carry that flag at conferences, in your podcast, doing keynotes, doing webinars, putting out books, right? Like all those different kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely. When you kind of talk about that, the person that there are a lot of people that come to my mind because I've interviewed a couple of chief evangelist people on my podcast, but Randy Frisch from
Yeah.
Uberflip came to my mind. It's his company, but he backed away from being like the CMO or whatever he was to being the evangelist, and he evangelized the whole concept of
Yeah.
content experience over content marketing. And I just thought he's just awesome in how
Yeah.
he does that kind of talks that story and makes you really believe and understand
Yeah,
that
for
is
me
the
it's
way to
Sangram,
go.
right? Like Sangram is the founder of his last 2 companies,
Yeah,
but
oh yeah.
he serves as chief evangelist, and he's the tip of the spear, right? He's out
Yep.
there, whether it was Terminus with ABM on the road show plus his podcast. Now it's GTM Partners. He's on a road show. He is interacting with the marketplace. He's got a daily, like a weekly blog of how he's building the company. He's putting out his podcast on it. He's got
Yep.
his peak community where he is iterating through all these different things, right? Like to me, like you said, that the founder that realizes, you know what, yes, we need a CEO, but more than anything, as the founder, the person that first discovered this problem, I want to be the tip of the spear. That's the chief evangelist.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. Snagger's
Yeah. Brilliant.
awesome. All right. There's a lot of flack around the idea of category design, though. So why do you think that people have such a hard time with it?
Yeah, I think it's that baggage. I think it's folks that enter folks that understand category first, where they hear where if they know the term category first and they're thinking of either a market category that already exists and they're trying to retrofit this idea of how do I get to, somebody that creates the category, um, versus people that intuitively believe that a category can exist and you can niche into that category in a specific way to design your own category, or the category exists but it's outdated, right? Like I think of Chris Walker when I think of this, right? He walked into
Mhm.
demand generation, and demand generation, the way that I understand it, used to be, do you have a sales force out there beating the pavement convincing everybody that what you have is what everybody needs? And Chris Walker walked in and said,
Yeah.
"No, man, demand generation today is how do you develop a point of view that creates content around the need for this thing, and people go from like not understanding that they really needed something to seeing the world this way and believing to go with it," right? Like I think, to me, that's a perfect example of someone who designed a category as opposed to created a category. And I'll just put it out there, I think that the there's, from what I've understood from the category thinkers group, there is kind of two school of thoughts of category design. It's those that call it category design and those that call it category creation. I find that the people that come from that call it category creation probably read Anthony Kanata's book. And when I hear him speaking, he talks a lot about creation of a category in the traditional Gartner category mold. And he talks about it being really, really
Mhm.
expensive and a really, really hard thing. Whereas the folks that enter from the play bigger side that talk about it as category design don't talk about it that way. They talk about it more as, how can I carve out my own lane in somebody's brain? How can I come in and reframe a problem in a way that allows me to, capture the lion's share of attention around this problem? So I think those are the two mistakes. Folks that see it as creation and think that you got to be first, or that you got to have some kind of like magical gatekeeper decree that you are the category king, and that can happen. That's not mutually exclusive. That happens after a long time, and
Yeah.
yes, a big investment. And then there's the folks like me that just read this thing. It obviously makes sense. They've had other ways that they've seen this happen to them in a personal way at a smaller scale, and they understand that, oh, this is just a way of thinking and a way to influence that is much more powerful, in the short term and the long term, if I execute this way.
Yeah. One of the things I liked, and we'll talk about the community in just 1 second, was that I heard in the community that I thought was really interesting is, um, the big thing is not to name the category. That's not the key thing. But and that someone else may actually come along
Mhm.
behind you and name it, but you've created it. Like, so you don't have to get caught up in, oh, I have to have this perfect
Yeah,
name for a category. Someone else may come behind you and give it a name, but it's still, you
true,
led that
true. As long
category.
as you are synonymous with the problem, then no matter what they name it, people are going to be like, yeah, 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 because it's this person that did it. And like, this is the person that knows it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, tell me about the category thinkers community. Why did you decide to create it? It's you and
And
John,
damn.
and you
Yeah, yeah,
call
yeah.
him
Mike Damp
Sam.
House.
I love that name.
Um, I am a founder solving my own problem in that, right? Like I said, I read Play Bigger in January 2020, and for about 2 years, the only people that I talked to category design about were people for whom I bought the book, convinced them to read the book, and then like would not shut up about it, trying to like talk to them about it. Um, and what
Yeah.
happened a couple years later was I saw Damp started a Slack channel around it for category design advisors. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I'm in on this. And as somebody that has been thinking about community really, really deeply as a go to market kind of like deployment, I remember seeing that Slack channel and being super, super into it, but having this like feeling that I'm like, oh man, if there isn't like an ongoing content piece that's gonna make this thing happen, and also an ongoing ritual where people like see each other and get to like connect with others, I think it's probably gonna like start strong and then peter out. And that's what happened, right? So then that happened, and about a year later, I saw John Ruggie, who was using his newsletter to host these like monthly AMAs. immediately I jumped in. I joined like every single one of them, right? Like there was a couple of those where it was just me and him. There was a couple, there was like 12, 15 people, all amazing people that I was really, really happy to connect with. And John and I hopped on a call and he's like, hey man, I'm really wanting to make this thing a community. So at that point I was like, well, first of all, John, are people that are on this like monthly call connecting and becoming friends not on this monthly call? And he's like, yep. And I was like, all right, cool. You have a community, right? Like, and it's you've already done it, right? Like you're already at the center, you're already become a watering hole for people to connect around the topic, which to me is the fundamental definition of a community. But if you want to make this thing into something where you have the like trademark watering hole, be it a Slack channel or a Facebook group or something like that, I don't think you really need to invent the wheel because Damp was doing this a year ago. Why don't you reach out to him and see if, we can combine forces and then include some of the principles of the things that I do, which are this idea of having a mix between a podcast, a a live internet talk show is what I call it, but it's essentially just a recurring virtual event that happens so people can come connect and really start to communicate, and having a Slack channel. And why don't we just organize it this way? That way we'll get his audience, get your audience, and then have something that's always getting the conversation going, which attracts people back to the water cooler. And he thought it was a good idea, reached out to Damp. Damp thought it was a good idea. At the time, I literally thought it was just going to be them because they're the big dogs in this world of category design, right? But they were gracious enough to invite me along to be a co-founder in this thing. And it's I it's like my new toy, right? Like I feel like um, I got to create something that I really, really wanted to see in the world, which is just a space for people that are, we call it people that are category curious to become category capable by interacting with people that have been doing it, by talking to folks that are trying to do it, like really taking away this, what Damp coined as category isolation as the villain, and bringing folks around this discipline that I really, really believe in. And we just so happen to be in a space where the folks that are the foremost thought leaders and like the tops of the discipline also happen to be incredibly generous people that want to promote this discipline through others and not just like be the only people that are known for this thing. I think it's a magical opportunity for everybody.
Yeah, it's I'm in it. I'm more of a
As
lurker
most
kind
people
of
are in
right
communities, which
now,
is
but
fine.
I just love the conversations, the topics, the real live people are in the mix of actually doing it, and you're seeing what they're thinking, and you guys are like talking back to them and making them think, yeah, that's great, or did you think about this? And I'm like, that's a community when you're actually sharing and talking back and forth and not just linking out to a bunch of content somewhere else, which a
Yeah,
lot of
listen, I
communities
think
are
the key to
more known.
community is sharing the stage, right? Like whether the
Yeah,
stage is letting you be the person that comes on the podcast, or letting you be the person that asks a question on the podcast, or letting you be the person that gives it, like if you give me a great idea for a podcast episode and we go do it, like it's all part of it, right? So like that idea of throwing down the rope when you're on the top of the mountain to bring people back up and allowing people to like focus on each other and share their value with the rest of the world, to me that's what makes the community go. And when you
yeah,
get a really interesting topic with people that are really hell bent on open sourcing the topic, I think is the way that Lockhead talks about it, and really sharing these ideas for other people to succeed with it as opposed to just them holding it. That's when it really provides this opportunity of what we're seeing.
yeah, definitely. I think it's great, and it's a great example of community building to really build the ideas around something great. Companies should do that all the time, although it's a lot of work. It
Yeah,
is a heck of a lot of work to not just start it and have it kind of fall by the
yeah,
wayside.
yeah. But it's what out there is not super valuable that is really easy to do and anybody else can do, right? Like you know, yeah,
Yeah. All right. This is great. I wanted to talk to you about your relationship flywheel and relationship driven growth, but I think I'd love to bring you back another time to
sure,
have that conversation because I think that's a big
yeah,
conversation in and of itself. So I have one
yes, I
more
can't wait for
question
this.
for you. Um, oh, yeah. See, that was just too much pressure.
I flipped it on you, Barb.
Yeah, you did, and it'll probably fall
No, it's
flat on
good.
its
Just
face right
if you're
now, but
watching, I've listened to a bunch of Barb's podcasts. I know that she has like a secret question at the end, and I started the pre-call with like, I can't wait for my secret question. So I took the pressure off myself. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So, I one of the things I do is when I have a guest on is I look at
Yeah.
all their LinkedIn profile and everybody's huge thing. So one of the things that caught my eye with you is that you did some work on with
I did.
sustainability companies. Massive, massive important thing to be
Okay.
talking about today. And I was just kind of curious of what is maybe the one thing that you think we could all do to have a more sustainable environment. I mean, there's a million
Man,
things actually,
listen,
but
remember how I told you that I have these like three KPIs in life, and one is how many times people reach out to me on like a whiteboarding a creative idea. My other one is this, my influence KPI. I think the number one thing you can do is go pick up a reusable water bottle that you use, right? Like the idea that we rely so much on single use plastics is abhorrent, right?
mhm,
So reducing your plastic consumption and just being the person that instead of just buying 10 different bottles of Aquafina or whatever, just go getting yourself a reusable hydro flask or a Yeti or something like that. I mean, every piece of plastic that has ever been made is still on Earth right now, right? Like plastic has a
yeah,
decomposition of like 400 to 500 years, and it's only been around for like 100 something years, right? So like every piece of plastic we've ever made is in the ocean, it's in a landfill, it's in our digestive system. So I think on a very personal level, the one thing that you can start doing today is go get yourself a reusable water bottle, use it as a reason to drink more water, and use it as a way to like reduce our reliance on single use plastic. It's just such a waste.
yeah, I love it, absolutely agree. My kids use water bottles for school, and I have to wash them every day, even though they say, "It's just water, you don't have" yeah, you
Yeah,
do have
my
to
wife is
wash
the same way.
them.
But
That's just
there's a special, just so you know, there's a for our friend that's listening right now, there's a special bond that happens when you are walking through an airport and you get in line behind somebody else to fill up your reusable water bottle instead of paying $4 for like 100 milliliters of water. Like everybody looks at each other and gives them the wink nod. You care about the environment and you're economically conscious, not wasting money. So join the club.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Well, thank you, Pablo. This was a really great conversation. Lots of great stuff about category thinking, category design. Thank you very much for
Thank you,
joining
Barb.
us
This
today.
is the first time that I get invited onto a podcast to talk about this stuff since we started Category Thinkers. So this has really helped my thinking, and I really appreciate you sharing your stage with me. And I just want to say that if you're listening to this podcast right now, Barb puts a lot of love into this. And the easy way that you can thank somebody if you're listening to their podcast is your podcast app has a way to just put a 5-star rating without doing anything. You don't have to write a review. You just have to go put a 5-star rating. And then if you want to write a review, cool. But like do this for Barb because I think she's putting out great content and it's a way for other people to find it.
Well, thank you very much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. It's nice to hear. All right. And before we go, thank you to our sponsor, Ingenix. They are a provider of content-driven content experience solutions. So content management for websites and mobile applications, customer portals, and technical publishing type solutions. So I would suggest if you're interested in any of that stuff to visit ingenix.com and you can get a demo, get a test drive, look at all the stuff they offer. It's a great company. And with that, we're going to end for today. So thanks everybody for listening, and thanks
Thank you.
Pablo for being here.